Well, good morning, all, and welcome to this week's Wednesday Walkabout. You just missed all of the kiddos walking to school. It is one of the highlights of my day, saying hello to the parents, visiting a little bit while I'm out here in the garden, and they are returning from depositing their kids to the school up the street. We are so fortunate to have a really good public school nearby. So today I want to concentrate, I guess, a little bit more specifically on one category of plants for the garden, and that is ground covers and the indispensable role that they play in putting together a beautiful tableau that has complexity, that has lots of different texture and color, and that will really, I think, pull the whole concept of whatever your garden design together is. In addition to just being beautiful and colorful, ground covers also just kind of provide a foundation for the other elements of your garden. And they are practical. They can prevent, erosion. They are a living mulch. They basically perform as the floor to the room that is your garden. And as you well know, it doesn't always have to be living mulch. It can, of course, be a ground cover that is hardscape, or in this case, softscape, where I did a mosaic of old brick and flagstone to form kind of a floor for the social patio. And what part of my morning ritual as the kiddos go to school is I come out and I put out my umbrella, I roll it out, open it up, and if I'm up early enough, I just sit out here and enjoy my coffee, sometimes read the news, meditate, just depending on what time it is. But let's get back to the role of ground covers in the garden, which I think is one of the most crucial components to making your garden look elevated and sophisticated. When I first started to garden, I think I had a rather narrow definition of what a ground cover was. And I would think of things like this gorgeous bronze ajuga, which puts out blue flowers in the spring and will spread. And I love its little tufts. And I also love the way it spreads and it fills in the spaces in between the flagstone. And this is probably one of my favorite ground covers. I've talked about it before. It is very tough, and as I have discovered on this exposure, it can handle a lot more sun than we think it can. But one thing it demands, I know, is perfect drainage. So having it here on a slope, I think has really been beneficial to its thriving and to its performance. And I've got more over here. So this would have been in my initial category of what I thought of as a ground cover. This and things like golden moneywort, which also makes a great trailer for pots and your container plantings. You can see here how happy it is. It's really filling in. And pretty soon there won't be a lot of negative space or mulched area exposed, which will be good because it will suppress weeds in addition to the mulch that's there. And it will be beautiful when it all blooms in the spring. And then over here, I don't have a lot of it. This was actually an interloper, but I've got a tuft of Vinca minor in here. Let me move this leaf. And I do keep this pinched back to really thicken up, and it will be beautiful, and eventually it will crawl to the back and fill in this area. And it too really likes this exposure. It wants a little bit more shade, a little bit more protection, but it's also a really good alternative for a prostrate ground cover that you just want to go horizontally, not get too tall. And it too puts out delicate little daisy-like blooms in the spring. And in fact, if you're trying to control it, though this doesn't need nearly as much wrangling as its larger cousin, which can be very invasive. And in some areas, probably this Vinca minor can be invasive too. But to keep it in check, you can just literally use a lawnmower in the spring and mow it back, and that will thicken it up and also tidy it up. The thing about ground covers is I think they really need to be great team players as part of the total team composition, if you will. So they want to coordinate with whatever other components you have in the garden in a color palette way, and also in kind of a horticultural way. Do they demand the same kind of cultural requirements that the other plants in the area demand? Now, that noise you hear in the back, it may be a little distracting, but it's very welcome, because today they're putting in my large casement windows in the great room, and I'm really excited about that. In my former home, underneath that 100-year-old oak tree, it was really difficult to get any kind of creeping ground cover established because of the competition from the tree for water, for root space, for just all of the resources that any plant needs to thrive. So I started using shrubs, lower growing shrubs, as ground cover. And really, in essence, I guess all shrubs are ground cover because they take up real estate in the surface of your garden and are an alternative to just lawn, and a beautiful alternative at that attracts pollinators, sometimes improves the quality of the soil, and is just a little bit usually more interesting than lawn. Though the quiet of lawn or any kind of turf grass is a wonderful canvas upon which other things can play. But in this area right here, I'm so pleased with the way this turned out in the foreground. And eventually, yes, this is going to change over time as this gorgeous Renaissance Better boxwood grows into a small hedge. Right now, it's just making a brilliant evergreen ground cover right here in this little boxwood village. And then in this area right here, you can see that I'm also using some variegated lemon thyme as ground cover. There's some golden feverfew. And then what has really surprised me at how valuable it is as a ground cover in this tapestry here, and that is the little spirea from the Southern Living, the Little Miss Bonnie spirea from the Southern Living plant collection. And I love the way it intermingles with its matte leaves into the branches of the boxwood. And then eventually, as the flower bed deepens, look at how beautifully it intermingles with this low-growing salvia. And I just I just did this on a whim, but I love the way this salvia looks right here. Even after the kind of weather we've been having, it does require deadheading, but I think it's a beautiful addition to this section right here. And you'll see that it's kind of a pattern of brick and flagstone, of boxwood and spirea, that then transitions into that gorgeous salvia. And over here, I've got some golden feverfew along with a spirea in the foreground. but then you see a void there. And I think what I'm going to do is in the voids behind it, I'm going to continue with that low growing salvia, pink salvia, because this has been so vigorous that I can easily divide it this fall and spread it around. On the opposite side, you can see it's performing the same role. It's low growing. I do need to cut this back. What I love about it, it's tough. And the area in the center where it looks a little bit leggy, I can cut that back and it will almost immediately flush back out. You can see the pollinators love it as much as I. And then I think it looks great with this Alternathera, or however you pronounce that, aka Joseph's coat, the chartreuse Joseph's coat, which I think makes a brilliant, a really valuable mounted ground cover and looks beautiful against the brick. You can see it on that side. And then you can also see how effectively it does the same thing on the other side. And in this case, it intermingles with the boxwood village. And then in the background, the secondary layer is this boxwood basil I have talked about ad nauseum that I am so smitten with. And it kind of repeats that rounded, mounded form, but the color contrast is really beautiful. And then you can see from this vantage point what a great blooming ground cover that salvia makes, both in its pink form and also in its purple form. There's a tuft over here that looks so dark purple and so velvety against the gray foliage that it's a little bit reminiscent maybe of the look that lavender could give. But I have trouble growing lavender here. But this is a petite variety, and I'm sorry I can't tell you which specific one it is because it was unmarked when I bought it at the farmer's market. But it's readily available in the spring. I think you can find it in a number of different places, a number of different garden centers. And then it looks so sweet with those crazy pink, low-growing echinacea from Southern Living. And then it repeats the taller version of the May Night salvia that's at the front of the border that's in need of deadheading. But all of this constitutes different versions of different ground covers. Some of it blooming, some of it mounded, some of it creeping, some of it vining. But it all does the same important thing, and that is give a foundation to the garden, pull it all together, prevent erosion, and adding dimension to the overall landscape. Most of the ground covers that I've been showing you are perennial. The salvia's perennial, the spirea's perennial, but some of it is not. And that which is not is that golden Joseph's coat, which I'm going to try to overwinter. The boxwood basil, I'll save seed and plant again next year. But the salvia, it is all perennial and it will come back, as will the ajuga, the moneywort, the vinca minor. Now over in this area that you've seen so many times before, these are larger shrubs that also make a brilliant ground cover and also contribute, I think, to the color scheme that I've got going of purple, kind of gold and white, pink. And that's that you can use shrubs like this sunshine ligustrum or the orange rocket, and you can use shrubs as ground cover. And at my former home, my first experience in using shrubs as ground cover was to use Nandina. in moss when I couldn't get anything else to grow. Now, maybe what has proven to be the most surprising ground cover to me, as beloved by the pollinators and the monarch butterflies as myself, and that is the butterfly candy. I mean, talk about a gorgeous purple ground cover. Now, it is, to keep it looking its best, it does require lots of deadheading, but oh my gosh, I think it is well worth it. Absolutely well worth it. Now, I planted more of it than I really needed, not so much on this side, but on the other side, because I didn't really, I guess I wasn't optimistic that it would flourish the way it has. Also, look at this great color echo between that salvia. I've showed it to you before, but this was very intentional, and that butterfly candy. And I love the repeat of that gorgeous purple. But I've kind of strayed off. The area that I was going to show you where I really overplanted it was on the west side. And I think my plans this fall, once it is cool enough to be able to make some changes and transplant some things, is I think I'm going to keep the lavender over here, but I think most of the white, because I did overplant it, I am going to relocate. So there'll be more negative space as ground cover in this spot. That lantana is a beautiful blooming, profuse annual ground cover that loves the heat. And this whole area, I'm really pleased with how it looks. The celosia, I've pulled out some of it. It needs a little bit more structure in that area, which I will remedy this fall. But probably my biggest disappointment of using shrubs as ground cover were these roses. And I am not sure if it's because I planted them pretty much later than everything else. I planted them a full month to 6 weeks later. And I think because of that, they didn't have as much time to get established as the other things in the garden, and they suffered because of it. I also think it's because this area right here faces full head on south and full head on east and west. So it is getting intense light, heat, and sun exposure on all flanks. And then, of course, the 100-degree temperatures did not help. So these have not performed as I expected, but I am hoping next year they will perform in a far superior way and will be a beautiful, blooming, sweet, romantic element to this space. And if not, I will just come up with another solution that works better. I would really be remiss if I didn't show you Lemon Lane again, which I've shown you so many times. But it too makes just a gorgeous kind of chartreuse gold ground cover. The Miss Lemonabilia, accompanied by Lemon Lime Nandina. And I would say Nandinas, and I know there is much contention and controversy about this, but those in the Southern Living Plant Collection line, they do not produce berries, and so they are not invasive like Nandina can be in other areas. So they can be planted with abandon. And just look how gorgeous this lemony tableau is. That furry plant over there, that is a foxglove. And I am hoping that this whole kind of area in here will be filled with blooming foxglove next spring. But the textural contrast of all of these and the fact that the Lemon Lime Nandina will pretty much be evergreen and semi-evergreen will be the Abelia, that together they really have the complexity as a ground cover and the interest and the dimension that I like so much. So that's a great combo is Miss Lemonabilia and that lemon lime nandina. And I've said it before, but I think it bears repeating because there's such great synergy between all of these components. And then you can see here, this roughly leaved addition is the Golden Feverfew, which is a biennial, and I'll be pulling it out once it blooms and goes to seed, and then it starts looking kind of scruffy. But right now, I prize it greatly for its leafy contribution. If there's any area in the front, in addition to the west side, which needs to be thinned out, that I think needs a little, just a little bit of zhuzhing, and that is Autumn's Edge, because there are things that encroach a little bit more into the summery area that I want, and color palette wise, it's not as pleasing to me. So some of that orange rocket barberry that you see in the distance, just to the right of the support of the tree, that's going to be relocated a little bit further to the east. So it's more in alignment with an autumn thematic. And I think that will be better, give a little bit more visual space to that front area. You know, a garden is never finished. It's constantly being tweaked. And the ground covers that are being tweaked are no exception. As areas die out, they need to be replanted. As it spreads, it needs to be divided. But they're very generous residents of the garden and always happy to play their part in the totality of what is a really beautiful garden. Well, this area right here is what I was referring to. So I just love how these orange rocket barberry, which I've talked about many times before, how gorgeous it looks with the Fire Chief arborvitae. And all of this will continue to grow. But what I think I want to do is take this more, let's call it a russet burgundy form of purple, and I'm going to relocate it closer to the edge in Autumn's Edge, where it's a little bit less crowded over there. And also, even though they're very, very happy, I don't think that color of burgundy looks as beautiful against that butterfly candy as it could, and certainly doesn't complement it as greatly, I don't think, as the Sunshine Ligustrum. So as happy as these are when it gets cooler, they are just going to hop, skip, and jump over to this area, which also is in need of a little bit more ground cover, because this area I have to weed more, I've noticed, and it's because it's not planted as densely. Now I want to make room for things to grow, but I also know that some of these plants aren't too far from reaching their maximum size. And so because of that, I want to get as good a coverage with them as possible. Now, 2 plants in here that I thought, actually 3, that I thought would be good ground covers for this really intense location. Finally, they just bit the dust. These were not Southern Living plants. They were cotoneasters that I planted over here. I think they were probably maybe a little too root bound when I put them in place. This area also needs to be irrigated a little bit more effectively than it is, so I'm going to have to tweak the sprinkler system. And so I just pulled them out, and you can see the remnants of the holes of where they were. And that may be where I really amend that soil better, dig the holes bigger, and that may be where I relocate more of those orange rockets, which will be beautiful over here and again can really handle this tough exposure. So as I said, no garden is ever finished, so I will just relocate them and they will move from this area down to this area once it gets cooler, and then they'll have all of the fall, the winter, and spring to set out a really good root system and get established, which I think was the issue with some of these that were planted on this side. Likewise, these apple blossom roses over here, which makes me think that again it was just an exposure issue and they were planted a little bit too late. They have not really taken off, but I am hoping with cooler temps that they will, and I'll give them a little bit more TLC. About the same time that I think I will remove these last vestiges of supports for this gorgeous October Glory maple that will, before too long, start to turn color, so I'll remove these. But from this vantage point, I do think it looks beautiful, and this is a pretty great example of shrubs as ground cover and in coordination with annual color in the background. And it may be that this celosia, now that I look at it, it's much more in the color family of this orange rocket barberry, so it might be relocated next year. I loved the cleome being here, but the celosia, it's beautiful, but I just think it looks a little bit out of place. So between its kind of burgundy foliage and the color of its flower, it might be more appropriate on autumn's edge. And I'm going to close here by saying that I cannot love my patio furniture anymore, not only because it's comfortable and good looking, but I just love the design. I love the design on the back. So there you are. There's your Wednesday Walkabout for today, discussing ground covers. A number of you continue to ask about that hose, and it is in a link in the description box below, or you can just go to Amazon and Google my Amazon favorites. And I'm getting ready to water, which is why it's out. And then I'll get on with my day. And I hope your day got off as beautifully as mine did.